It can be kind of an intimidating thing to meet one's heroes. Every one of us has heroes in our lives, right? People that we look up to, people that we maybe even try to emulate ourselves after. Maybe they're just somebody who had an impact on you. Maybe it's a particular television star. Maybe it's a movie star. Maybe it's a scientist. Maybe it's a speaker. Maybe it is an author. Maybe it's just somebody who just means something to you and to you only. But for whatever reason, that person has made some sort of an impact on your life. And so maybe you've never gotten a chance to meet your heroes, but you think about what would happen if you ever got to. You think about what you would say or what you would do and how you'd want to interact with them to maybe make those moments that you have with them, however brief, still significant. And maybe you think about, oh man, if I were to talk to them, I'd ask them this question because that's a question they've never been asked before, and they're going to remember me forever because I asked that question. But the reality is if you are fortunate enough to actually get to meet your hero live and in living color, chances are good you're going to be so overwhelmed that you really don't know what to say if you say anything at all. I've had an opportunity in my life. I've been fairly blessed. I've gone to several different conventions and different places to actually get to meet some of my own people that I look up to, my own heroes, if you will. Most of the time, I'm able to keep a pretty level head. I'm able to remind myself that these are just men and women who have a job that's just a little bit more, known than mine. When I met Robert Englund, who famously played Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, he and I had a nice little chat. I was wearing a Creature from the Black Lagoon t-shirt, and he informed me that his high school drama teacher was in that movie. It was kind of a cool moment between me and Bob. I can call him Bob, it's fine. When I met John Schneider, who was in Dukes of Hazzard, he told me that I was one of the few people he had met that day who actually made him feel kind of short. If you're over 6 foot tall, you understand that sometimes it's nice to feel like you're short. Right, Scott? Yeah. I like Scott. He makes me feel short. So there was kind of an awkward moment when my family and I met Walter Emmanuel Jones, who played the original Black Power Ranger from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which was a show that was hugely influential to me. When Mandy introduced herself, she said, "Hi, my name is Mandy," and he immediately bust out into Barry Manilow. And Mandy informed him, "My husband sings that to me all the time," and so the Black Power Ranger looked right at me and said, "Hey, sing a little bit for me." And I said, "No, sir." But when I got to meet probably one of the most prominent in my development as a child, a person who I looked up to as a personal hero, I got to admit, I didn't know what to do in that moment. About 8 years ago, I was given an opportunity to meet one of my childhood heroes, a person who I looked up to, who I admired, who I thought the world of. I got an opportunity to meet him in the flesh. This particular personal hero of mine is a 2-time New York Times best-selling author. His first book actually hit the #1 New York Times list, and it was actually on that list for an unprecedented 26 weeks. It remained in that top 10 list. He has published 11 books in total. He has personally raised millions of dollars for various charities, giving up hours after hours of himself in an effort to try to help other people who were in need. He is the subject of a Netflix documentary. He was also the subject of an A&E biography. He also happens to be a 3-time WWE World Heavyweight Champion. He is a WWE Hall of Famer. He is known around the world as one of the toughest professional wrestlers of all time. His name is Mick Foley. Yeah. Just drink it in. It's okay. I have never made it a secret to any of you that I am a gigantic, lifelong fan of professional wrestling. I love it. You can say it was fake. It's not fake, it's predetermined. Okay? But I love professional wrestling, and every professional wrestler fan can always point to at least one guy who is the reason why they are a wrestling fan. And for me, that's Mick. Mick Foley, in my opinion, is the reason why I am a professional wrestling fan. And it's not just because he put on great matches. It's not just because that man on the microphone could make you believe, even for a moment, that no matter what is going on the ring in front of you, what you are watching is very real. Mick Foley is really one of my heroes because he doesn't look like a stereotypical professional wrestler. Right, when you think pro wrestler, most of you probably think Hulk Hogan. You think in guys who look like they're chiseled out of granite, guys who look good, guys who are always going to do the right thing and all that stuff. But Mick was never that guy. I've heard him talk about that in podcasts. Like he would say he worked out all the time, but he never could get himself to look that good. He had one particular promotional photo where he had just the minor little bump of a deltoid, and he was excited about that. But he doesn't look the part of a professional wrestler. He's a little pudgy, a little on the round side. He doesn't look overly athletic. And for a guy who grew up a little pudgy and a little round and the opposite of an athlete, to see somebody who looked like me rise to the very top of a very competitive field, it was inspiring to me. I wanted to be that. I wanted to be a pro wrestler for a really long time in my life. Unfortunately, God did not give me the spine for that. Literally, I have massive. And if you're talking about a profession where you have to fall down 80% of the time and then get right back up, that's a problem for you. But Mick Foley, even whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, it didn't matter. I love the guy. I was cheering for him. It didn't matter what was going on. And so 8 years ago, he was in my hometown, and he was doing a book signing for his most recent book. And so I called my parents, because at the time we were still living in Illinois, and I was like, hey, I want to go meet this guy. I didn't tell them who it was, because they never encouraged me watching a professional wrestling. But I want to go meet this guy, and it was during the week. It was like a Thursday night, which is a super random time for something like this. But I worked it out with my parents. The girls were going to come with me because Mandy had to work the next day, and Mom and Dad were going to watch them, so I could have an opportunity to stand face to face with a hero of mine. And so I brought them over, and I was so excited. I spent days after we'd worked everything out trying to think about, what am I going to say to this guy? Right? This guy who is a prominent figure in my life, a guy who is the reason why I still watch professional wrestling, no matter how bad it can be sometimes. And if you've ever watched professional wrestling, sometimes it gets real dumb. Real dumb. Thanks, Abby. Appreciate that. But I found myself wondering that, what do I ask him about? Do I ask him about wrestling? I didn't think that was going to be good, because there's no question I could possibly come up with ever ask him about professional wrestling. Do I ask him about his books? Well, no, he's done a million different interviews, including on Jay Leno of all people, talking about his books. So I couldn't come up with something that Jay Leno couldn't come up with. So what do I ask this guy? And it weighed on me for days. And in fact, the day of the event actually came, and I went to the Markland Mall, and there was this much bigger line than I expected, which was okay, because I still hadn't figured it out yet. And so I'm waiting in line, trying to just brain, what are you going to ask Mick? You're only going to have a few seconds with him. What are you going to say that's maybe going to stick out in his mind, that's going to be different from everybody else? And finally, as I was only about 3 or 4 people away from the front of the line, it hit me. I thought, you know what? I'm a dad. And he's a dad. And he wrote 2 books while wrestling full-time, which is a job that takes you all over the world. You're constantly traveling. And when you're not traveling, you're at home trying to be that dad. And so I wondered, how did you find the time, man? What time management tactics did you use to be able to write? His first book was almost 800 pages. So how do you find the time to write those kinds of books and still be a present father and still be one of the top professional wrestlers in the world? But man, that's a great question. That's going to floor him. I'm excited about this now. And finally, it got to be my turn to go up front. And the guy who was there running everything or whatever, he put it on a sticky note so that way Mick could address his autograph directly to me. That's pretty cool. He asked, is there anything else you want Mick to inscribe there? And I said, I can't think of anything. He said, okay. So he hands Mick Foley my book and says, Mick, this is Brandon. And suddenly I found myself making eye contact with Mick Foley. The guy who, when he was wrestling injuries of his right ear, ripped from his head and still finished the match. The guy who I had watched be tossed 20 feet off of the Hell in a Cell structure by The Undertaker, landing into the Spanish announce table like a car crash. And he got up and finished the match. The guy who I had seen put his body on the line countless times for my entertainment. A guy who the clip of him winning the WWE Championship for the very first time, I have watched at least 1,000 times, and 25 years later still gives me goosebumps every single time. And I'm making eye contact with him, and he looks up at me and he smiles, giving me his signature toothless grin, having lost all 4 of his front teeth on 2 separate continents and never bothering to get them fixed. And Mick Foley gives me a smile and says, "Brandon, great beard." And suddenly everything that was in my brain ahead of there was replaced with a very singular thought. Mick Foley likes my beard. We took this photo to commemorate this auspicious occasion. Oh, don't worry about why it's all Santa Claus stuff. That's not important. But I can promise you, I said very little. I was so caught up in that particular moment of being face to face with my childhood hero that my brain was a complete and utter blank. In fact, I was so caught up in the moment that whenever we finished this picture, Mick held out his hand to shake mine, and I just kept walking. I didn't even shake the guy's hand. I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts. I didn't want this moment to be done yet, but it had to be. Because they had other people in line behind me. They needed to get things moving because they had to be done at a certain time whenever the mall closed. And so this moment that I got to share with my childhood hero wound up being a little on the awkward side. I didn't get to have a deep, meaningful conversation with him. I didn't even get to ask him my question. I think I just asked him a stupid wrestling question, one that he'd probably answered 10 million times beforehand. But even though I didn't want the moment to be over, it had to be. We had to move on. We had to keep going. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of us throughout our lives. Like, we all have these moments in our lives that we wish would just carry on forever. These moments that are so significant to us. Maybe for you it is meeting your childhood hero. Maybe it's getting an opportunity to talk to this person who's meant something to you for a long period of your life. Maybe for you it's a moment that's just so much smaller than that. Maybe it was a really cool concert you went to. Maybe it was just something else entirely for you, but we all have those moments in our lives where we just want them to keep going on forever, but the cruelty of life is that it has to end. The moment has to pass. The vacation has to come to a close. The concert has to wrap up because the band's got to hit the next town. The moment you love it, no matter how much you want to stay in that moment forever, you can't. Because that's just the way that life works. Peter had probably 1 million different moments in his life that he wished would never end. 1 million different opportunities in his life, 1 million different things that he was a part of that were so significant and so special to him that there had to be that part of him saying, I don't ever want to leave this. But if we have to point to one particular moment, I think it takes place in our text today. We're going to be in Luke chapter 9 today. So if you want to go ahead and turn there in your Bible, we're going to talk about a significant moment in Peter's life, a moment that he probably never, ever in 1 million years thought was going to happen. But if I'm honest with you, the moment that we're going to talk about, boy, it feels kind of random. Like it just sort of happens. In the grand scheme of the Gospels, this particular moment that we're going to talk about today is just sort of an outlying moment. Right? Like before this moment, we see all the normal stuff of Jesus. We see him out there teaching and healing and doing all the things that we expect Jesus to do. And then we have this moment. And then it just goes right back to doing the normal stuff of Jesus. Both Matthew and Mark also have this moment in their Gospels as well, so we can take confidence that this actually happened, that this did in fact take place. But it is such a strange moment because it seems to come out of nowhere, it happens, and then it's like nothing happened. We're going to see it in Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 28. 28? 26. Yeah, 28. I was right. Hey. But everything else that Peter has been involved with up to this point, this feels like the sort of thing that we're used to seeing. Last week we talked about a moment that I'm pretty sure was not one of those moments that Peter hoped would live on forever. It was a rough moment. In the grand scheme of his relationship with Jesus, it's kind of an outlier. It just happened and they seem to move on. It was a hiccup in the relationship. But it was just something that happened and moved on. But Peter is reaching the point where he has seen Jesus do incredible thing after incredible thing after incredible thing, to the point where you got to start to wonder, is the miraculous becoming mundane for Peter? Is all of this stuff that he's seen Jesus do, is it starting to become a little bit more, okay, yeah, we're used to that? Because if it is, I promise that this moment is going to change this. A little over a week after what we talked about last week, that kind of worked out well, Jesus invites James and John and our old buddy Peter to go hiking with him. They're going to go hiking up a mountain, and they're going to go up to this mountain so that they can pray together. This is a little unusual as far as Jesus goes, right? We're used to seeing Jesus break himself off to quiet places to go and pray, but almost always he's going by himself. A couple of weeks ago, that's what he was doing before he went walking on the water, right? He had gone and broken off from the disciples to have a quiet moment to be able to pray himself. And yet this is one of, if not the first time that Jesus has ever invited any of his disciples to go with him. And so Peter has to be somewhat excited, right? I'm going to get to go with Jesus to find out what it's like to pray with him, to go and be a part of all of this. But there's also got to be a part of him wondering, why? Why is Jesus giving us this invitation? We read about this invitation in verse 28. It's right there. It says, "Now about 8 days after saying these things, he took with him Peter and John and James and went up to the mountain to pray." Even though Peter may not understand why this moment is happening, he has to be somewhat excited, right? Because maybe this is Jesus taking us aside to show them how he prays in an effort to help make their prayer lives more meaningful. Maybe this is an opportunity just for some extra teaching just for the three of us that the other 9 are never going to get. Maybe we feel special at this moment. But at the very least, it's a little bit more of an intimate moment shared with the person who just a week ago Peter proclaimed as being the Messiah. So of course he's going to take this opportunity. He's going to go with Jesus. He's going to go climbing up that mountain so he can have this moment to learn how to pray from the Master himself. And so as they make their way up this mountain, you got to get the impression that Peter, James, and John, they do what kind of comes naturally to them. They let Jesus take the lead. Like, you pray first. Right? You ever been in one of those like prayer circles and everybody's just kind of awkwardly staring at each other, like who's going to be the first one to say anything out loud? I've never understood why we get so nervous about that. We're not talking to each other, we're talking to God. So don't be afraid to pray out loud. Cool? That's just a little extra for you. You're welcome. But as Jesus begins praying, something sort of happens, and we don't really understand what it is that's happening. It's almost as if Peter, he can't keep his eyes open. And it's not just Peter, because James and John too, it's like their eyelids just suddenly have weights on them. We read in the beginning part of verse 32, it says, "Now, and those who were with him were heavy with sleep." Before he really knows what's going on, before they've really even gotten started in this prayer time with Jesus, the disciples are falling asleep. That's embarrassing, right? To fall asleep in prayer? Good thing that's never ever going to happen again, right? Yeah. When they wake up, though, they see something that is rather, it's unusual to say the least. When they wake up, they see Jesus, but he looks different. Like all of a sudden the clothes that he's wearing are super white. They are whiter than the socks that you see in the Clorox commercials. They are almost glowing. They are so white. And I'm not really sure, but man, it looks like even his face is different. It was just Jesus a few moments ago, but now he looks almost, dare I say it, angelic. Back at verse 29, it says this: as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered and his clothes became dazzling white. And so in front of these disciples who were just a second ago passing out, but now they're seeing that their friend, their teacher, their master has transformed in front of them. They're awake now, right? Right, a moment ago, it was just normal, everyday Jesus. Now this is super bright, white Jesus. That's going to get your attention. And if that alone weren't shocking enough, they suddenly have the awareness that we are not alone up here. There are two other people that were not here a moment ago, and they are having a conversation with Jesus. Luke tells us exactly who it is that shows up, because if it's not scary enough that these two people showed up out of nowhere, who those two people are, that has to change everything. In verses 30 and 31, it says this: and behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, I want you to notice something in that text. At no point in any of the verses that we're talking about today does Luke ever include a line where Jesus turns and says, hey, Peter, I want you to meet Moses and Elijah. Right? At no point is there an introduction to who these two are. And so that implies that there is at least something about these two that Peter just innately recognizes them. Nobody's told him who these are. He just knows. In this moment for Peter, his entire life, from the time he was a small child, his parents had told him the stories of both of these men. He'd heard all about Moses in Egypt. He learned about the plagues. He learned about how Moses raised up his hand and suddenly the Red Sea was parted and they walked across on dry land. Right? That was really wet ground just a second ago. Now it's dry. We're all getting across. That's crazy to me. Right? The entirety of the Exodus. He learned about Moses scaling the mountains to get the tablets from God himself to lay down the law. And now there he is. He learned about Elijah. He'd heard all the stories about Elijah and how Elijah proclaimed to the king himself one day and said, there's going to be a drought and there's nothing you can do about it. And then there was. Crazy. He learned about the mountaintop experience of Elijah facing off against hundreds of other prophets and having a big old competition of who God's for real. And he learned about the fire coming down and consuming not just the altar and the sacrifice, but the rocks around it. What? How hot does a fire have to be that rocks turn to ash? He learned about how Elijah over and over and over again would fearlessly confront these two evil rulers. And now, here he is. Both of these two have been dead for hundreds of years, and yet here they are, talking to my pal Jesus like it's every day. This is wild. Right? At no point in Peter's life did he ever think he was going to meet these two face to face. He had their action figures. He had the posters on the wall. You can picture him and his brother Andrew kind of running around pretending to be these two and having those arguments that kids would have. Well, I get to be Moses and you have to be Pharaoh. Oh, but I don't want to be Pharaoh. Just me? Okay, cool. It was last week, but fine. But this is the kind of stuff that he would never expect to happen, to be able to stand face to face with these guys. And yet here they are. You want to talk about a cool moment for a guy. And so as Peter is in this moment, and he is completely awestruck by what is taking place in front of them, he wants this moment to live forever. He wants to stay here, talking with the two biggest names that he could think of in all of Scripture, at least in the top 10 for sure. He doesn't want this moment to end, but no sooner than does he have that thought, than he begins to realize, oh, they're leaving now. And so he feels compelled. He feels like he's got to say something to try to get these guys to stick around, right? But what do you say? What does a humble fisherman, a guy who is nobody, say to these two titans of the faith to get them to stick around for a little bit longer? So he opens his mouth. And he says what we read in verse 33. As the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And oh, I love Luke for leaving this in there, not knowing what he was saying. You think? Peter is so caught up in this awesome moment that what he's saying is somewhat ridiculous. And as much as I want to beride Peter for saying something this stupid, and you got to think that maybe James and John just stop for a moment, dude, that's the best you got? I'm going to be real with you. I can't do anything but give him props, because he was somehow able to pick his jaw up off the floor, related enough to say anything that resembled a coherent thought. But this statement makes so much sense, because he does not want this moment with these two to end. He wants to stay here a little bit longer, to soak up more of their wisdom, of their knowledge, of just being able to be in their presence. But as he says this, suddenly a giant cloud encompasses the entirety of that mountaintop. And if Peter thought that this moment was cool, it's about to get weirder. In verse 35, a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him." What? Again, my brain likes to put together the picture and stuff, and so I picture Peter and James and John all just kind of quickly looking at each other like, "Did you hear that too? I don't know where that voice came from. Do you think was that God?" Not only has Peter just gotten an opportunity to stand in the presence of two of the biggest heroes of the entirety of Scripture, but he has just heard the audible voice of God himself. Understand, in the wholeness of the Old Testament, there are significant heroes of the faith, guys who did incredible things in their lives who never heard the audible voice of God. And yet this common, ordinary, slightly dorky fisherman just heard the voice of God, confirming for him what he already knew. A week ago, Peter proclaimed, Jesus is the Christ. And now he is just seen as that same guy has had a conversation with Moses and Elijah, and he just heard the voice of God himself saying, "This is my son." If there was even just a left in Peter's mind that maybe I'm wrong, it's gone. It's gone. Peter is completely floored by this moment. This has to be, if not one of, I'm going to go ahead and say, the most significant spiritual moment in Peter's entire life. And no sooner than when that voice finishes speaking, that cloud dissipates. And it's just Jesus. Back to normal. 3 guys are completely floored by what's just happened. The 4th guy that's with him says, all right, time to go back. What? At no point in time does Peter want this moment to end. I can't believe for a second that Peter would want this moment to come down from the mountaintop. I mean, so much happened for him up here. All the confirmation that he ever needs that Jesus is in fact the Christ has just taken place right in front of his face. Not only is he given crystal clear confirmation of who Jesus is, not only did he get to meet 2 of the biggest heroes of his faith, he just heard the voice of God audibly. He does not want this moment to end, so much so that he offers to build shelters for Moses and Elijah, just in the hope that it can last a little bit longer. But, and we cannot miss this part, as significant a moment as this was for Peter, it had to end. It had to end. It needed to be finished. And they needed to get back down from that mountaintop because the work was not finished yet. There was still more to do, more to accomplish. Jesus had more teachings to teach. He had more healings to give. He had more love to share. And we're not too far removed from when Jesus would need to go and do the work. The very reason why he came to this planet in the first place. The very thing that he was sent here to do. They had to come down from that mountaintop because there was still work to be done. The gospel still needed to be preached. I think most of us in here, I think it's a fair statement that most of us in here, we have had those mountaintop experiences, have we not? Moments where your faith has just felt so real. Like you could almost reach out and touch God. Moments where the presence of God is so heavy in what's going on in your life right now that you know for a fact there is not an argument alive that can possibly sway you away from your faith because you know it to be true because you've had this moment. Maybe for you it was a camp. Right? When you were a kid, maybe you just went to a church camp that was just so awesome and so moving that it solidified that faith for you. Maybe it was a conference that you went to over a weekend. Like you didn't really want to go, but you went anyway, and it felt like everything that the speakers were talking about was directly talking to you, and everything was just kind of working, and you just wound up having this hugely significant moment in your faith. Maybe it was just a Sunday morning. We got a great worship band here, and maybe that particular Sunday they were just playing banger after banger, and it was just connecting with you in a way that it has never connected before, and you just felt the presence of God in this place. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just a random Tuesday morning. You woke up early and you opened up your devotional and something about what was written there just connected in a way that it had never connected before. And maybe that coffee was just the right temperature for you and you just happened to glance up from your notes to see the sun rise and to catch the sight of a cardinal or a bluebird or whatever bird is super cool to you. And you just felt God's presence in that moment. We have all experienced our own mountaintop moments in our faith, but here's the thing. The moment passed. As much as we wanted it to, that moment did not stay forever. You had to go back home from camp. You had to head back to your family after the conference. The preacher prayed and service was done. Or you had to get to work that morning. The moment had to end. Because there's still work to do. A lot of Christians, we clamor for those mountaintop moments. We want them so desperately. We want to get back up there. We want to be back in that moment. And maybe for you, it's been a long time since you've been up that mountaintop. Maybe it's because it's been years even since you last felt that way. Can I suggest that maybe the reason why it hasn't felt like you've been back on the mountaintop is because you've been neglecting the work? That hurt, didn't it? I've been fortunate in my life, blessed even, because there's been a handful of moments in my life where I've gotten to bear witness as somebody who I care about, somebody who I have prayed for, somebody that I have shared with, climbs up that mountain for the very first time and experiences Jesus for the first time in their lives, giving their heart and their soul to following after him. You want to talk about a mountaintop moment? The beautiful thing about that mountaintop is if we want to get back up there, one of the fastest ways to do so is to lead somebody else there, which is the work that we as Christians are meant to do. As Christians, we're not meant to spend our entire life sitting on top of a mountain. We're meant to climb that mountain and then climb back down and help others climb up there too, so that they get to meet God in a whole new way for themselves. And so maybe the reason why you've not felt like you've been on that mountaintop in a long time is because you've not been doing the work of it. The mountaintop moment has to end because there's still work to be done. So let's get to work. Paul would write in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58, and we will close with it. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain.